everyone, welcome back to Trees and Turtles. My name is Imogen. In today's video, I am sharing everything I loved about my Europe trip. If you're not already subscribed, make sure to do that, give this video a thumbs up, follow me on Instagram, and let's get started. So I made a video about one lesson I learned from each country and stuff I liked about like places I liked about each country, but these are just general lessons and stuff that I loved about my Europe trip in general. Okay, so number one is the opportunity to experience so many different cultures in a short time. I travelled in an unconventional way, and that was backpacking through a new country every day. And I know that doesn't suit everyone, and a lot of people have told me I was crazy for trying to attempt it, and maybe I am, but I enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed how mentally stimulating it was. I experienced so many different cultures, languages, countries, cities in such a short time, and I found that immensely exciting and really, really cool. So the opportunity to do that was definitely one of the best things about my Europe trip. And obviously, yes, it depended on the structure of the trip and how I planned it, but I planned that to for that to happen, if that makes sense. So yeah, the opportunity to experience so many cultures in such a short time. Alright, number two, one thing I noticed was how useful it is to be able to speak German. If you are new here, you might not know that my second language is German, but for those of you who speak German, ich spreche ein bisschen Deutsch, and yes, I have been speaking German since I was about 7 years old, so I am reasonably fluent. The best way I describe it is when I go to Germany, I'm usually mistaken for being Dutch, because Germans tend to think that I'm too fluent to be British, but I'm not quite fluent enough to be native German. So basically they think I'm Dutch, which is a compliment, I guess. But anyway, so I speak fluent German, and I didn't realise how useful that actually is. So for example, I'll give you an example, in Slovakia, my host didn't speak much English, my Airbnb host, but she spoke fluent German, so we just communicated in German the entire time. In Vienna, I had a problem with my train ticket, and luckily I was able to speak German. I mean, they had some English, but being able to speak German is actually really, really, it's an underrated travel hack in Europe, and I just realised that. So I did feel a sense of, competence. I was like, oh yeah, this is great. I can communicate. It's great to be able to communicate. Number three, I love the architecture. I always yap on about architecture in my videos, and if you watch any of my Europe vlogs, then I'm going to be yapping about the architecture, because the architecture is gorgeous, you guys. Seriously, the architecture is amazing, and I just loved, particularly in Monaco, I really loved it in Prague. Yeah, those two in particular, but everywhere really. Just the variety and the sort of history bound up in the architecture of each place was just amazing. And it also makes me feel sort of very, very small, but in a good way. I remember I arrived in Prague and I was just sort of wandering around, standing there and looking up at the city gates, and I was like, wow, I feel absolutely tiny right now, but this is amazing. Right, number four, the nature. I experienced so much nature, and I got to be outdoors a lot when I was on my Europe trip, and I got to go to, for example, the Geneva Botanical Garden, I got to go to the Lisbon Aquarium, Oceanarium technically, and I just got to sit in so many parks and chill under so many trees and by so many fountains, and that was an enormous highlight. I genuinely loved that so much about my Europe trip. The amount of time I was able to spend outdoors, just chilling under a tree, that is an underrated thing to do. I mean, I know a lot of people enjoy it, but even so, I loved being able to spend so much time in nature. I also loved the sense of perspective it gave me. I was going through a lot of personal stuff when I was on my Europe trip, but it did really give me a sense of perspective. Now, specifically, I've talked in other videos about how I almost went home from Vienna. Vienna was about halfway through, and there was a lot of stuff going on, and I was just getting really discouraged, and I thought, I want to go home. And I talked to a couple of my friends, and they persuaded me not to go home, which is good. I'm glad I listened to them because I had a great time. But that sort of train ride from Vienna to Vaduz actually gave me a big sense of perspective, and more broadly, the whole trip gave me a big sense of perspective. Really, a lot of the stuff in my life is relatively insignificant in the grand scheme of things, and that might sound like a mean thing to say about myself, but it's not. I promise it's not, because it actually gave me a big sense of comfort. And I'm sure that any of you who are watching and you're seasoned travellers are like, yeah, we've seen this all before. But it was new to me. So I like that about my Europe trip, and it gave me a sense of peace, and it gave me a sense of perspective. Something else I loved, the logistical travel challenge has made my mind busy and oddly reduced my anxiety. Now you might think, come on, that's weird. Now surely you have a lot of logistical travel challenges and that's going to increase your anxiety because you're like, well, what if I miss this flight, or what if I miss this bus, or what if I miss this train, or what if I don't get to my hotel on time to check in, okay? But actually, weirdly, that stopped me overthinking about other stuff in my life because the most important thing in my life was I need to get on this bus right now. And I couldn't like worry about other stuff that was going on because I was just worried about this bus. And weirdly, that made everything seem very simple and it oddly reduced my anxiety. So it kept my mind busy and it actually helped my anxiety, which is weird to say, but it did. It also gave me an increased sense of resilience and self-confidence. I definitely was nervous going into the Europe trip because I'd done solo travel before. I travelled to Bruges in 2 years ago for a music festival just for the weekend, and that was great. But I hadn't really done extended solo travel. Like, this was a 10-day trip. This, like, if something goes wrong on day 2, like, it's up to me to get out of there, right? So I was definitely like nervous, but also when I completed the trip, it felt like such a big moment. I was like, wow, I really did that. So it really gave me an increased sense of resilience and helped me know that I can problem solve, like on my feet, as it were, and self-confidence. It really helped my self-confidence. Okay, I have 2 more things that I loved about my Europe trip, and number 1 is that it felt so good to be able to come home, and I really gained a renewed appreciation for being at home. Like, when I was at home before I went on the trip, I was like, I'm bored, you know? But then I went on the trip and I was like, oh, you know what I would give for an evening alone in my flat right now? So when I got home, I had a real sort of renewed appreciation for being at home, and that has lasted. Like, I am appreciating being at home right now. So it really felt good to come home. And finally, I really loved the accessibility of fun and informative stuff to do for free. Obviously, I was like totally a budget traveller, and I very much appreciated, like, there's so much stuff you can do for free in Europe. Like, I was busy all the time just running around and looking at things. And there's like, you know, I paid for some of my sightseeing, but the majority of it, like 95%, was completely free. And I saw so much cool stuff, and I just had such a great time, and I really liked how accessible a lot of like the sightseeing was to everyone regardless of budget. So that was really cool. Alright, that was everything I loved about my Europe trip. Well, maybe not everything, but probably the highlights. If you're not already subscribed, what are you doing? Make sure to do that. Give this video a thumbs up, follow me on Instagram, and I will see you next time. Okay, bye!